We welcome you back to CBS Mornings. Candidates have been making their final push with the polls opening this morning in these crucial midterm elections. President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump delivered their closing messages at rallies last night. And for the first time, we also heard House Speaker Nancy Pelosi describe the moment she learned about the horrible attack on her husband at their San Francisco home. Pelosi told Anderson Cooper at CNN it was around 5 o'clock in the morning when she was awakened by a loud, repeated knocking on her door in Washington.
So I run to the door, and I'm very scared. I see this Capitol Police, and they said, "We have to come in to talk to you." And I'm thinking, my children, my grandchildren. I never thought it would be Paul. They came in at that time. We didn't even know where he was or what his condition was. We just knew there was an assault on him in our home. For me, this is really the hard part because Paul was not the target, and he's the one who's paying the price. It's really sad because it is a flame that was fueled by misinformation.
There's obviously been a lot of discussion about whether you'd retire if Democrats lose the House.
Well, I have to say my decision will be affected about what happened the last week or two.
We are joined now by CBS News contributor Mick Mulvaney and CBS News political contributor, that's Ashley Etienne, along with Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes. Good morning and welcome to you all. Let's start with you, Ashley, if we could, because it was heartbreaking. She's clearly very traumatized. She became, somewhat emotional during that interview last night. What did you think when you were watching her, as someone who knows her well?
Well, I couldn't help but also be emotional.
Yeah.
It was hard to watch her. I know her to be very strong and very resolute, so that was hard. I mean, I think the one thing we have to, if we could take a step back, this Congress opened up with a deadly attack on the Capitol and threats to hang the Vice President of the United States. It was bookended by an attack on the Speaker in her house, her husband, in her house. No matter how the elections turn out today, this is an issue that we're going to have to grapple with as a nation. We're going to have to figure out, how do we get back to a we, not an us versus them, which is perpetuating this violence. So that was my top takeaway from it. My heart goes out to the Speaker. I know how much she loves her husband and how much she loves this country. So I was heartbroken by it. But as a nation, we have to figure out, we as American people, it won't be an elected official that's going to save us here. We're going to have to say enough is enough.
Yeah, and how do you speak to that, Mick? Could you, about the us versus we? Because it is very concerning.
It is. I think Ashley's right. It's not going to be a politician that saves us, for lack of a better word. One politician didn't get us into this problem. One politician is not going to get us out. People ask me, how do you fix Washington? I'm like, Washington doesn't really lead. Washington reflects the nation. The reason Washington is so divided is that the country is. How do you fix that? It's a harder question, but don't look to Washington to fix this. Look to us to fix it.
But when it comes to the election deniers, though, that primarily is the Republican Party, and that, I think, has led to many problems.
No, that's not true. Look, January 6th is what it is. It was awful. It's terrible. That's not. I'm not here to defend that. But Democrats have denied election results just as much as Republicans. If you take January 6th out of the equation,
that's just factually not true. I mean, there are hundreds of Republican candidates on the ballot tonight who have denied the outcome of the last election. There's nothing like that on the Democratic side.
Stacey Abrams still has to admit she lost last time she ran in Georgia. Look, again, this is the debate, right?
Right.
Why can't we all agree that everybody's a little bit at risk and a little bit at fault, and we try and fix it, as opposed to everybody saying, well, it's got to be a Republican fault, and until they change, the country's not going to fix.
Nancy, I want to get to you in a bit, but Mick, I want to touch on something you said. You said politicians, they can't save us, but they sure can divide us. And we hope that politicians reflect this country, but it seems like instead of a reflection, it's an injection of divisiveness. So why don't you believe that politicians are at the crux of why we are so divided, why it is us versus them during this time of year?
Because
during all times of year, to be honest with you.
Politicians derive their power from the people that vote for them. There's no magic sort of black, dark hand of an invisible hand in Washington, D.C., looking to the extremes in both parties and saying, send me Marjorie Taylor Greene and send me AOC. That's not how it works. The people in those districts look at those people and say, those are the folks that best represent me. Why don't we send them to Washington, D.C.? That's what I struggle with.
Nancy,
in the interview last night, Nancy Pelosi said that what has happened to her husband will affect her decision about whether she will remain in politics. What do you think, how do you think she's leaning? Because the way she said it, on one hand, you could say she's not going on anywhere.
Right.
On the other hand, she seemed to be saying, I've had enough. You know, this has deeply affected my family.
Well, there have long been questions about whether she would actually stay and serve out this term if her party does lose control of the House. You know, does she really want to be House Minority Leader again? At the same time, for some years now, there have been younger members of the party who have been pushing for new leadership at the top. They want somebody fresh. They want someone new. At the same time, you know, it's always been difficult to identify who's the person in the Democratic Party who has her negotiating skills, her relationship, her fundraising ability, her ability to bring a very rambunctious party together. There have been some names that have been floated, Hakeem Jeffries of New York, Adam Schiff of California, and there's also a question about what her deputies would do if she were to step down. James Clyburn of South Carolina and Steny Hoyer of Maryland, they're both in their 80s as well.
Ashley, as we anticipate the Republicans being favored to win the House, there already is some finger pointing when it comes to messaging among the Democrats. What is something that you wish they would have done differently?
No, I think it's accurate. I mean, I think there's a lot of frustration within the party. Folks feel like we should have leaned more into the economy, inflation. Others feel like we did a great job of sort of doing a D strategy and all the above messaging. I mean, I would have advised the president differently. He had really big wins in a bipartisan way. Probably the most productive first term we've seen in modern history of any president. I would have advised him to find a way to elevate those bipartisan successes and those accomplishments, wrap his arms around Republicans that he did that with, right? And then to demonstrate to the American people that democracy can still work, that we can still do big things together. You know, the president ran on a message of healing.
Yes.
That seems to have been lost.
Yeah.
But I think had he sort of come together with Republicans to say, look, you know, America, democracy still works.
Yeah.
Not that it's under threat, but what's under threat is the progress that we've made together, both Democrats and Republicans. I think that would have gone a long way. It would have also helped to neutralize the extremes in both parties and build a bigger, broader coalition for him going into the midterms in 2024.
You're right. There are extremes in both parties. And some people, when they think extremes, Mick, they think Donald Trump, who has made it very clear he has a big announcement next week.
Big announcement.
We all believe it's huge. We all
Mick,
believe
do you know what that
he's going
announcement
to-
is?
We all believe he's going to run. As someone who knows him well, do you think that he should lead the Republican Party again?
No,
Should he
and
run for president?
I've said that very candidly. I think he's the only Republican who can lose in 2024. My party is ready for generational change. We have really good folks on the bench: Ron DeSantis, Tim Scott, Nikki Haley, Mike Pompeo, Mike Pence. Go down the list.
What should the Republican priorities be at this point right now?
The priorities should be generational change. We can get the policies of Donald Trump without having Donald Trump on the ticket. If Donald Trump's on the ticket, the election will be about him. Either vote for him or against him. In all candor, no one voted for Joe Biden in 2020. They either voted for or against Donald Trump. Donald Trump is one of the few people who can beat Donald Trump. If he's on the ticket, the election becomes about him instead of about the issues that we want to push. When we had a chance this time around to push the issues we want to talk about, inflation and crime and safety, we're doing well. We don't get that chance with Trump.
One thing we know for sure, he still has influence on the Republican Party.
Yeah, Donald Trump on line 2 for you, Mick.
Nancy Cortez, Ashley Etienne, and of course, Mick Mulvaney, thank you so much for joining us.